we're going to talk about tabletop exercises and quick introductions about me. I go by Zodiac. I go by Matt. I've been here at SAINTCON for many years doing things. You'd notice here a couple of DEF CON groups. I started the DEF CON Davis County group. I grabbed Pope's coattails to help start the DC 435 group. I don't know, they claim me, but I'll still try to claim them. I enjoy riding bikes, but I mostly enjoy riding bikes because I also enjoy eating donuts and drinking hot chocolate, and I need something to keep up with the donuts and hot chocolate. Lately, the donuts and hot chocolates win over the bike riding, so I'm working on it though. I do work for one of the sponsors, but I'm not doing anything salesy because that's not my role. Real quick before we get started, I still have a boatload of mini badges. I dumped out like a ton of them downstairs on the tables. If you don't have one, you want one, the ones on the right, I've got all those. Come find me. You can all have a mini badge. All right, now that the intros are over and we're done with that, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to talk about how to do tabletop exercises. So if everyone can stand up and bend over like this guy, we'll get started, get you stretched, get you limber, and we'll keep going. Not really. We're going to talk about really the too long didn't read of table talk is this is a way for you to practice your incident response processes and go through, figure out where your holes are, what your gaps are, and how you can be better at your incident response, how you can actually communicate better, how you can be more effective, and not have the stress of a real event. One of the things that I do at work is we help a lot of companies that are in the middle of an incident, and it's very clear that they are not familiar with their IR plan. They're not familiar with their cybersecurity insurance. They're not familiar with the skill set of their own team. And figuring those out is hard. Figuring those out during an incident is almost impossible. So if you haven't gone through the tabletop, if you haven't taken the time to build those relationships, discover the process, your cybersecurity insurance policy is not light reading. You're not going to sit down and read that for 5 minutes in the morning and be chipper and happy. If the first time you read it is when you need to call them for help, you're not going to be doing good. Tabletop is to kind of go through some of these things, to identify these pieces, to figure this out so that when an event happens, you're prepared for it, and it's not it's less of a crisis. It's a manageable crisis. You can deal with it, and you can make your way through it without too much problem. This is, if you don't know what cybersecurity infrastructure and security agency is, the federal government created this agency to kind of coordinate and spearhead some of the federal cybersecurity initiatives. All these, I see a couple people taking pictures. All these slides are already shared with Chris, and the last slide is a QR code that links to these, and you can just have them with notes and everything. So you're welcome to take pictures, but if you want higher quality pictures, you can get them in just a minute. I should have started with that in the intro, sorry. But this is straight from CISA's website and what their definition of what tabletop exercise is. It says tabletop is a facilitated discussion of a script scenario in an informal, stress-free environment that is based on current application or applicable policies, plans, and procedures. The TTX, which abbreviation tabletop, design process, facilitate conceptual understanding, don't let your laptop go to sleep. Conceptual understanding, identity, strengths, and weaknesses, and/or achieves changes in policies and procedures. The success of the exercise depends largely on group participation in the identification of problem areas and the resolution of those problems. That's a really fancy way to give a little bit of feedback on here, but really, really what they're saying is it's a casual conversation to test your IR process. It's not a full in-depth, you don't go through and say, in a tabletop, you generally won't pull out the SIM. You will say, someone, you have a phishing email, where do you go to look for it? And they say, I would check our mail gateway, or I would check our M365 logs, or I'll check our Google logs, or whatever you're using for that product. And often that's deep enough in the thing. You don't have to pull out the interface and show in the process. These are designed to be short, informal, discussion-based, casual, and manageable. There are obviously more formal and less formal tabletops, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Is we're going to start with a formal tabletop process and what that looks like, and then we'll get kind of more into a casual tabletop you can do within your team. The formal tabletops are a little bit longer, and the informal tabletops are a little bit quicker and a little bit easier to do, and also often a little bit more fun. This is kind of a little bit funny for tabletop because, like I said, CISA has a very well documented tabletop. They call it the CTAP, the CISA Tabletop Exercise Package. If you want a formal tabletop, the CTAP is the standard operating procedure, and it's phenomenal. It does a really good job. It gives you great documentation. It gives you an after-action report. It gives you all the information you need to not just go through the process, but it also gives you action items. It gives you areas of growth, areas of improvement, and it identifies areas of strength, and it helps you to create next steps and outline the process. But also tabletops can be really, I think some of the best tabletops are the ones that throw the book out and just are casual ones you have for fun. So depending on who you are and where you're at in your organization, you could go either way. This here is just talking a little bit about some of the elements of a successful tabletop. I mentioned a couple of these, but I want to make sure that I just hit the points of these are informal. These are not, again, this is not an incident. This is not, you're not entering tickets into your ticketing system, but they are discussion based. It is a conversation. I think one of the things that a lot of tabletop exercise facilitators do is they jump in too quickly, or they accept the answer right off the gate, and they say, they'll propose a scenario, and the responders will say, we'd check the sim. The best thing you can do is to say, okay, talk about checking the sim. Who checks the sim? Do they have permissions? Where are they looking in the sim? What data are they looking at? What logs are they doing? Are there any correlations? Is there anything they do with that data once they have that? That's the kind of conversation you want to have to go a little bit deeper into here. As the tabletop facilitator, you want to make sure that these are plausible scenarios. You don't want to go into a bank and talk about their faculty members getting compromised because it's not education. You want to make sure that the scenario applies to the organization that you're there to share the scenario with. These are exploratory, meaning the facilitator is there to ask questions, to be very open-ended and just be quiet and listen. Let the conversation happen. Adaptable. There are some groups you go into, and as you get into the scenario and you start going, it's very clear that they have a very mature and very robust cybersecurity practice, and they are familiar with their incident response plan. Those times you probably need to adapt and go a little bit deeper and make it a little bit more challenging, make it a little bit more, or throw a few more curveballs at them. Change things, but also sometimes you'll get in there and you'll see that this is a very new program that's just starting to figure out where they're going and what's happening. Maybe they are new in the role and don't know the IR plan yet, and you don't want to be discouraging and leave them with no hope and no excitement. You want them to come out of this. You want to be do enough exploration to give feedback and next steps, but a very young program doesn't need to know some of the finer details and some of the minutia. And so maybe give them a little bit of a pass on the harder things and focus more on, if you're looking at like the CIS framework for their things, focus more on implementation group 1 and 2, and don't beat them up so much about things in implementation group 3, and you don't even need to really explore some of those. But the no hidden agendas is really a big thing of a lot of times people try to use tabletop exercise as a stick. They're like, I'm going to come in here and that guy's not good at his job. I'm going to get him. Or that lady over there, she really doesn't like this, so I'm going to use this to expose what her biases are. And if you're going into a tabletop exercise with an agenda, it's going to cause more problems than it'll solve. And so make sure that it's an unbiased, open forum for discussion and for conversation. Next one, this is if you're following the CISA, the CTEP, the CISA tabletop exercise packet. You start with scoping, that goes with calls to identify a lot of logistics and things. They have pages and pages of conference room size and food and coffee and drinks and all the things, but also who will be in attendance and who's funding it and who's taking care of things. That's what happens in the scoping. You also kind of start getting some of the ideas of desired or plausible scenarios in the scoping. And that's what you do as the facilitator. Use that scoping time to go through a conversation with the participants or with the leaders of the tabletop and say, what kinds of things are you looking for? What are plausible scenarios? What are you hoping for? But again, you don't want to totally outline this. You don't want everyone to know. You do hold cards a little bit close to the chest as a facilitator so that as it unravels, it is new and a novel idea and a novel process or a novel incident to the participants. This documentation, apparently I didn't update that slide, so I'll update this when you check the link at the end. The documentation is the deliverables you give to them. There are some prior to the tabletop and some after the tabletop. Prior to the tabletop, you give you'll give the incident manual or the incident handbook to all the participants, and that kind of gives a very quick one-line brief introduction. It outlines the rules, it outlines the structure and the process of the tabletop. Then there's the actual tabletop session. And if you look at the next slide, you'll see I copied this and I didn't update 2, 3, and 4. The session is the tabletop session. This can be anywhere from a couple hours to I'm doing one in 2 weeks that'll be 2 days long with a company. And so the session goes through, and you can do anywhere from 1 or 2 scenarios to 8 or 10 scenarios. It really depends on what you're trying to do and what you're scoping for and what you're looking for. But the session, you'll open it up, you'll lay down the ground rules, you make sure everyone has a copy of the handbook, and then after you do that, you just kind of start going into the scenarios. And again, following the last slide, you want to be open and discussion based are probably 2 of the key. The deliverables at the end there is what I was talking about, that after action report, where you kind of go through and get the best practices, you get the areas of strength, areas of weaknesses, and areas for improvement. And you kind of review some of that in that after action report. During that session, one of the best parts about it, one of my favorite parts is the hot wash at the end, which is, if you're familiar with, it's a term common throughout the federal documentation, but basically it's a very brief session to say, hey, let's get lessons learned now while they're fresh in your mind. I think that's one of my favorite parts as I lead these discussions, because oftentimes the things that the participants learn and the things that the facilitator learns and the things that the observers learn are not the same things. And that hot wash at the end of the session is kind of a key piece to highlight the differences that everyone picks up in the process. This is the roles for the actual session once you get there, but the overall process, but this mostly focuses on the actual session. The players are anyone who participates. If you're opening your mouth and talking and discussing the IR plan, discussing who to contact, who to do things, what's going on, that's the players. The observers are people that are there but don't have an active role. I find often in tabletops, the observers and players are not exactly who they think they are at the start. One of my favorite things to do is to get into the incident and get partway through and turn to the leadership who thinks they're there just as observers and say, the press just called, who answers the call and gives them a statement. And leadership's like, I'm just here to observe. I'm like, okay. And I turn to the lowest sysadmin. I'm like, they called you. What's your answer? And immediately leadership's like, no. They call me. And I'm like, oh, so you are a player. You are here to do something. You don't want that guy answering the phone? So these are a little bit fluid, but really you kind of have observers and players, and you want to make sure that they you get the right people in the room and the conversation happens, and if they bounce between them, it's fine. The facilitator is really the people who are presenting the scenarios that unravels the details and kind of helps go through the process and helps the exploration. Data collectors are often the same as the facilitators, but sometimes dedicated people. Basically, the people that take notes for the for the after action report and for the hot wash at the end. I talked a little bit about this before, but I don't think I have a full slide on it, so I want to pause just a second before I forget and just say the way that these scenarios work is you often just start with a simple prompt and you say, Friday afternoon, your systems go down. What do you do? The goal is to ask questions and unravel, and then they say, well, I go log into monitoring, and I see what monitoring says, and the facilitator will say, well, monitoring's down too. Okay, then I go log into my virtualization, my hypervisor, and see what's going on there. Okay, you get your hypervisor, your credentials don't work. What do you do? I don't know. I go to the password vault. Your password vault's on your hypervisor. What do you do? And so it's really just a question time, and you get the information one step at a time as you ask questions, as the participants or as the players observe or interact with the facilitator and ask questions. Essentially, the facilitator is the SIM, is the monitoring system, is all the things. And so the players say, I would check the SIM, and they say, as the SIM, you see a log entry that a user logged in from Panama. Okay, that's your data point. Where are you going to go from there? And so it really just unfolds one data point at a time through that exploration process. This is really the best summary I could come up with for who's who and who does what within the tabletop. Nick Fury kind of plays the facilitator. He's kind of there pulling the strings behind the scenes. You don't see him a whole lot. When you see him, it's a big impact and it makes a big deal. The data collectors are kind of the agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. that they do things behind the scene. They really make it happen, but you don't. If you look in the movies and the blockbusters, you almost don't see any of the agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. They kind of hide behind the scenes. The players are the big guys, doing all the work and making all the things happen, and the observers are kind of the little people that are going up in the island in the sky. They're not doing a whole lot with that. This is who are we going to bring to your tabletop? Once you decide you're going to do it, your organization wants to do it, you want to test your processes, you want to gain more information, who do you bring to the table? And the answer is everyone. You definitely want to have your security analysts, you definitely want to have your incident responders, you want to have operations. But it depends a little bit on what you're doing. Are you doing a DR tabletop, or are you doing a malware, ransomware tabletop? There's overlap in who comes to what groups. I've seen some tabletops that are purely leadership focused, and I've seen some that are purely technical focused. This is all dynamic, but really the more inclusive of a group you can get to the table, the better the communication happens, and the more everyone gets on the same page. The more everyone's on the same page, the smoother the incident will be. It's not like if you have a ransomware event, you're going to stand at the door and be like, no, I'm sorry, you're on the server side, and there was a desktop that was compromised. We don't want your input here. You don't filter when you're in an incident, so why would you filter for a tabletop? You want to encourage and request these people to show up and come for these. These are some of the benefits and some of the things that you as an organization can get out of holding and hosting a tabletop exercise. Like I said, and we've covered most of these, so I'm going to go quick. Preparedness, you'll be a little bit more prepared. You'll know your processes. You identify risks, and these risks are a gap in your plans, but they're also risks in that as the conversation goes, a lot of it happens where the facilitator will say, well, you got phished. And they're like, yeah, we got phished because we don't have any email security. And your CEO might be in the room and be like, wait a minute, we don't have email security? Why don't we have email security? Why didn't you ask for this? And then the SOC analyst says, I've been asking for it for 4 years. And the manager says, yeah, it's not a high priority. Don't worry about it. Discussions like this happen more often than you think. And so you identify risks in the plan, but also in the technologies and in everything else, and everyone's on the same page. This is a way for everyone to communicate to each other and say, these are the risks. And maybe it comes out that the CEO says, yeah, you're right, I've known of that. We just don't have the resources. And all of a sudden, the analyst who's been asking for this for 4 years says, oh, I didn't know that's why we don't have that yet, because we've prioritized these other two things. That, you gave me a raise last year instead of buying email security. Maybe I'll shut up and stop whining for a little bit. And so it's really good to get that communication and the consistency across the board. The team building collaboration, I find that when teams don't get along, when there's fighting and infighting, it's because they don't have people they're fighting against. They have roles they're fighting against. They have email addresses they're fighting against. You want to make teams get along better, you put faces and names to people. You put them in the same room and make them talk to each other. You talk to each other and you start to build those relationships, and it's just like, to make a SAINTCON reference, we talk often about how some of the friendships that we've built here at SAINTCON, like as I'm on the committee and help with things, some of the friendships are great. And I think they're great, not because I am super compatible with these people, but because we've done hard things together. We've done things that were not fun at the time, but worth it in the end. And that's the common shared friend, or that's the common core of the friendship. And tabletop, and hopefully not an incident, but if you get an incident, it can help build some of those friendships. So getting people in the same room and getting them together. Compliance and regulatory, some industries, some companies, some requirements, whether it's FedRAMP or depending on what requirements, federal or otherwise, that you are subject to, you may be required to do tabletops at a regular interval. Proactive security culture. If you invite more than just the security team, all of a sudden these concepts go from you need to do this to, oh, that's why you're asking me to do this. That is a good idea. This is really good. It's kind of similar to getting the management and the team members on the same page. You get everyone involved in the tabletop, everyone starts thinking more about security, everyone starts being more proactive about security, and it starts to become everyone's job, not just your job. Same page, we've talked about that like 4 times. Standardized procedures. Often, I can't tell you how many times I get into a tabletop and I have 2 people who are adamant and 100% convinced that this is our incident response plan. And the 2 people are pointing in opposite directions. And so that's when you're like, you turn to management, you say, what is it? What is your incident response plan? What's documented? What are you supposed to do? Very often organizations have inconsistent responses depending on who is the person going through the process. Tabletop is a great time to identify these inconsistencies, correct them, and make sure that each incident is handled the same, regardless of who takes the ticket. Cross-team collaboration is pretty similar. I talked a little bit about that with the proactive security, getting people on the same page, getting them together. It ties into the team building and collaboration, but building those relationships really helps on a lot of fronts. Do a tabletop, your life will be awesome. You'll be rainbows, unicorns, and puppy dogs forever, and everyone wins, and that's the end of the presentation. Not really. But wait, there's more. So we've talked a lot about the formal processes of tabletops and how to do them. We've talked about the CISA CTEP and what we can do with that. That was a little bit dry, pretty like I said, very formal. It is a very awesome process. If you haven't done those before, I would recommend you do them. I also talked about informal tabletops, and that's where we're going to go next, is talk a little bit more about some of these informal ones that can be just as good, but it can be a team meeting, it can be fun. The easiest way that I know to do tabletops, or informal tabletops, how many of you guys have looked at, seen, or how many people have played Backdoors and Breaches? How many people have heard of it? Is that more people at least have heard of it? Okay. This is Dungeons and Dragons for tabletop exercises. And it's way easier than you think it is. John Strand from Black Hills InfoSec, he created this. So it started with, he made cubicles, compromises in cubicles. And then he made, another one was chutes and ladders. What was that one called? Pivots and payloads, that's what he called the next one. And so he'd made a couple of games, and he's like, they were always lacking some of the pieces and some of the follow through, and you needed a really, really skilled person to lead them, and it was too hard, and the teams didn't know what was going on. And John Strand had been working on this, trying to come up with ways to do it. And in 2019, Jason Blanchard and a couple others from Black Hills InfoSec finally said, you know what, we're going to make this a card game, and they outlined a lot of things. And it worked out. They did a phenomenal job and made it so that this really is casual. It's simple. You do need someone who's a little bit skilled and experienced to lead the tabletop. It's very similar to Dungeons & Dragons. If your DM's new, it's a little bit rough, but if your DM knows what they're doing, has been through some things, it's a little bit easier. Been through things to lead this backdoors and breaches doesn't mean you need to have led a whole bunch of backdoors and breaches, but be familiar with the red team process, be familiar with compromise, be familiar with incident response. If you're familiar with those, you can be a very successful leader in backdoors and breaches. This is a picture from the online game. They have a physical card game that you can buy cards on their website. It's the Spearfish General Store because it's based in Spearfish, South Dakota, but also because it's Spearfish. And anyway. So you can buy physical cards from Black Hills Information Security, or they have this for free online. You can go to play.backdoorsandbreaches.com, or the software that drives this is on GitHub, and you can self-host it if you want it. Or there's 10 other ways you can play it, but those are the most common ways. All right, so we're going to go through a little bit of, and this is, when John Strand introduces this and plays this, he talks about how all of these rules are guidelines. They're not rules. And that this goes back to the adaptable part of tabletops in general, but backdoors and breaches specifically, it's more structured. There's some rules that they write down, but really change it. Don't be afraid to adapt it and do what you want. Go through really quick of the rules of backdoors and breaches and how it works. There is incident master, who is it's the same as the facilitator. They can also do data collector, but generally backdoors and breaches is casual and doesn't have data collector with the documentation and follow-up. And then defenders are players and observers and everybody else in the room. That's it. There's just the two roles. For the setup, you have cards. You shuffle each color individually before the game. So this is how you can lay it out. This is the website. Like I said, we're going to talk about the different categories of cards really fast, and then give you an idea of what's what in there. The red cards are attack cards. That's initial compromise. What caused the incident? This can be a fish. This can be, it can be whatever, various things that happen to compromise the system to get the initial foothold. The yellow is also, so the types of cards, there's attack cards. They're red, yellow, purple, brown, and blue. And that's the ones, red, yellow, brown, and purple across the top. Sorry, I keep coming here because my notes for this is there. I should have put the notes on the last slide, but they're here. The yellow cards are pivot and escalate, and that's how, if this were a real attack, how the attacker would have pivoted and escalated into your environment. The purple one is also attack. It's also an attack card. It's persistence. What do they do to maintain persistence? What are they doing to, is it a scheduled task? Is it various things? And all of these, if you get the actual card, it tells you exactly what it is. It gives you the name of it. It gives you a definition. And it also gives you what can identify and nullify that card. Brown is the last attack card. It's C2 for command and control and data exfil. There's one of each of the attack cards selected at random. They're played face down on the table, meaning no one can see them, but the incident master does know what they all are. The other types of cards, Blue is procedure cards, and if you're doing this just as a casual game, you randomly choose 4 procedure cards, and those procedure cards are those 4 are your established procedures. Your established procedures, this is played just like D&D. You get a D20, and on your turn, you roll a D20, and so you have modifiers to the D20. If you have an established procedure, you get a +3 modifier. And when you roll, if you get a 10 or above, it's successful. If you get a 10 or below, it's a failure. So the blue are the procedures, the gray are the injects, and the injects are good to, we talked about adaptable. Injects are the adaptability. You can play an inject, and those are things like, you put, one of them is legal wants to talk to the lead incident responder, and so the lead incident responder can't talk for 2 turns. There are various things in those injects. The green cards are consultants, and you call consultants, and they are your superheroes that come and save the day. You'll play a blue card that says call a consultant, and then you choose which of the consultants you call. Some of them end the game and say, turns out it was just a pen test and no big deal, your incident's over. Some of them say, depending on the consultant, some of them say +2 modifier on all rolls for the rest of the game. Some of them say +5 modifier for all sim incidents because this consultant's really good at sim. So you select one of each initial compromise, pivot and escalate, C2 and exfil and persistence, each of those attack cards. We talked about how you lay out you choose 4 of the procedure cards. And then the gameplay is 10 turns long. The incident master looks at the 4 attack cards and goes through. You get 10 rolls of the dice. What happens is the players will say, we want to choose, or you have no idea what the initial compromise is. You have no idea of anything else. The incident master will give you a prompt and say, this is a problem with your email, or this was a fish. And I guess you wouldn't say a fish because that gives you the initial compromise. So they would kind of give you the initial symptoms very similar to a tabletop of your systems go down on a Friday afternoon. You would say, okay, let's check the sim. And you roll the D20. And if sim is able to nullify any of the cards, then the incident master can choose which of the cards that it can nullify to flip over of your 4 cards up top, your attack cards. So let's say you say sim, and sim could nullify both. It could do initial compromise, or it could do C2 and exfil. The incident master would flip over one of the 2 cards, but not both of them. I'm doing like the most boring explanation of this possible. The game really is fun to play, I promise.
If you play online, do you need the security expert or computer access?
You're saying the incident master?
Yeah.
This just gives you, this is the whole website. There's no storyboard, there's no storylining. So you would do this in a conference room with this on a projector, and your incident master would be clicking on his mouse or her mouse and doing things. So you still need the incident master. So once they do that, you go through. If you have a failure, then that card, if you fail, like if you roll a 10 or a lower, then that procedure card gets flipped over and you can't use that procedure for 3 turns. And then the other thing is if you get a natural 1 or a natural 20, then you get to do one of the inject cards. Or if you fail 3 times in a row, you get an inject card. Some of the injects are actually pretty helpful. A lot of them are not helpful. The other thing about this, I've seen people modify it, and like I said, they're more guidelines than actual rules. Well, I've seen people say if you get anything over a 19 or over an 18, then you get an inject card. They like to play inject cards and they want an excuse to play more. So even if you use the procedure cards and you're doing the +3 modifier, they say you rolled a 15 with your +3, you have an 18. So anything 18 and over, we're doing injects. Said the rules are guidelines, they're not solid rules. This is both in a tabletop and in backdoors and breaches, you need a facilitator or a incident master to be the one to run it, to answer your question. Without this, it doesn't happen. You need someone who knows what's going on a little bit. This is a kind of a key role to be successful in the process. This is tips. I've covered a lot of these as we've gone through about what it takes to be successful as an incident master or a facilitator. The key is to remember that the goal is to learn and to discuss. You're there to get people to have conversation. Too often, incident masters, facilitators are the first ones to speak, and your goal is to shut your mouth and let them get nervous and let them squirm and start to say, I don't know what I would do. I'd maybe look at the email gateway. And as soon as one person says that, the next person says, no, that's not right. You'd look over here, and that discussion immediately jumps off. Don't be afraid to let people squirm a little bit to get that discussion going. But also make sure you're asking open-ended follow-up questions. Also, one of my favorite questions is, you ask them, you say, what's the reason that procedure could fail in your environment? So they say, I would look at the SIM. All right, why would the SIM fail? Well, because we ran updates on that server and forgot to repoint syslog back at the SIM. It probably could fail. A lot of times in backdoor, this is one of the ways with backdoors and breaches is better because it has the randomness of the dice. You roll one die, and a lot of times the SIM is the right answer to fix the problem, but they roll like a 2, and so the SIM fails. Sometimes that happens in real incidents too. You get in the middle of it, why did it fail? Well, we only had one copy of our SIM and it was on-prem, and that was the first server they ransomwared. All our SIM data was encrypted. Yeah, that sucks. But if you ask them, why did that fail? Then they start to think about, okay, why did that fail? How do I prevent that failure from happening in the future? How do I keep this going? Also, we talked about make sure it's plausible, make sure that it's real. If it's not real, if they're not engaged, nobody cares. If you're not making it applicable to them, it's not going to work. The counterpoint to this that is a tip for players, for people involved in the game, roll with it. I've had a few of them where people get belligerent in there. Well, that wouldn't happen in our environment. It's impossible. It's not impossible. Just roll with it. Even if it is impossible, just roll with it. This is all about hypotheticals. Let's go with it and see what we can do. Be flexible, adapt to real. I find the best way if you're doing real tabletops to adapt real stories. I find, or as we go through in my job, like I said, we help with a lot of incident response, a lot of organizations that are having problems. We'll go through and do incident response with them. And then I'll take that story and I'll subtract out anything identifiable. I'll subtract out anything that is applicable, and I will represent that story in a later tabletop scenario. I'll adapt it to a different customer for them and change any facts I need to for that. Talk through the process, meaning talk them through and lead them through the discussion to say, okay, you went to the SIM. What did you search for? What are your search terms in the SIM? You want to find out failed authentication? Great. What are you looking for? What types of authentications? What would you consider anomalous? Because there are a lot of authentications in your log system, and if you're just going for one entry, like I'm just going to search, you're not going to find anything if you don't know what you're searching for or you're not familiar with that data. Walk them through the process, make sure they understand it instead of just understanding keywords to throw out. Other things, also make sure, one of the things I love about backdoors and breaches is the game's not over until you have identified initial compromise, C2 and exfil, lateral movement, and persistence, until you've done all 4 things. Too often in real life IR organizations, that computer is compromised, it has malware, help desk, reformat that computer, incident closed. We never find initial exfil or initial compromise. We never find lateral movement. We never find persistence. We never find, all we do is find the infection, treat the infection, and move on. I think that's one of the good lessons that we can do from playing backdoors and breaches with our teams is show them that incident response is more than just remediating the initial problem, the exact thing. You want to find out, did they actually get into my environment and move across, or did they get, or were they just was it really just one system? And then in the end, we talked about this, the hot wash. Make sure you are reviewing that initial finding at the end. You're going through and getting some of that feedback, getting some of that things, just because the players in the room will all have very, very different lessons learned, and everyone will benefit from the lessons learned of the others in the room. And so give them that chance to share the information and to talk. This one is that big enough you can read it? Okay. So this again is you will find players like this who are creative, and you can use it to your advantage or you can use it to frustration. A lot of times in incidents, you look at, even if you go back to the Maersk shipping response, when they were compromised and they took down 20% of the shipping throughout the world, what saved them was a domain controller that was offline for maintenance. This technicality saved Maersk shipping. On the other hand, if you let this technicality run the entire tabletop, you're going to want to punch somebody in the throat. So as the facilitator, as the incident master, you're going to want to control it and guide them carefully. I guess is the best way to say it. Anyway, but they are a lot of fun. This was a little bit of a dry presentation on what is, I genuinely think is, whether it's a full CTAP tabletop with like following all the CISA guidelines, or just a fun game with backdoors and breaches. I really think that tabletops are one of the most fun things you can do. I love leading them. I love participating in them. I like watching people get on the same page. I like the creativity when you sit with a good facilitator and you watch the facilitator find ways to throw curveballs or to get different people in the room engaged and get people talking. Tabletops are a fantastic experience. Backdoors and breaches is quick, it's brief, it's fun, it's exciting, and it's a good way for your team to learn and to grow together. And so I hope that you don't look at this and say, well, that was that wasn't really a funny presentation, but you look at this and say, that's a good opportunity for me to grow and to help my team learn more about their incident response and their processes. Next is that's all I've got really to cover this. Anyone have questions, comments, thoughts, stories from the trenches of ones you've done?
So my question is, kind of having done it and used it, how much value does playing backdoors and breaches give you? I mean, I don't want to have my leadership look at us playing this game and think, what are those losers doing in there? And so it's like, what is that value? I mean, it's hard to quantify something, I understand that. But
so I'll give you my answer, and I'm interested to hear feedback from others. But my initial answer is the really, really easy thing to tell your leadership is we're training the new guy. Because new people don't even know, like if you just read the backdoors and breaches cards, it'll say, and I guess my deck's down there, I'd open it and do it, but we can come up and look at it later. But you can look at it and it says, okay, your initial compromise was a fish. And then the next section says, you would detect a fish with one of these 4 tools. And then underneath that, it gives you 2 links that say, go here for more information. And so you can, if nothing else, get new people within your SOC familiar with what are compromises. And backdoors and breaches, it's a card game. They printed it. Is it the current modern, do they have, what's the latest spider that hit MGM and Caesars? I want to say random spider. It's not random spider. It's, what's that? Scattered spider. Yeah, thank you. Is it going to mention scattered spider? No, because they printed the cards 3 years ago. But it'll talk about concepts and things in general that give you ideas of what's going on. And so it's really good to get familiar with tactics, to get familiar with things and to think through the process. But also you can just say it's training for my guys. I'm going through and I'm making them justify and think about what tools. And I'm saying, you're showing them if you roll a 2 and your SIM's out of business because you had a hard drive failure, because you had, your processor melted because you had a data center heating incident, and so you don't have a SIM, you still have to do IR even though you don't have a SIM. And so it forces people to get creative and think outside the box. How am I going to solve this problem? And so the answer is training the new guy, but also training the older guys. That's my answer I would give leadership if they asked why you're playing that game. But I'm interested if anyone else has a different answer they would give or have given their leadership for that. Yeah.
I've done it several times, and it's a conversation starter, and go into it with that in mind. Say, this is a conversation about how we do things. We're trying to make this, this response plan, and just go with that. Then they know what you're doing. And most of the time when I've done it, it's been, we need to do this with other groups. You need to get doing this with other groups and get them on board with this.
Yeah, and for those that didn't hear, his answer is play it with leadership first, and then leadership becomes your evangelist for you, and they see the value and they start to say, play that more, play it with other teams. Did you have more you were saying? Sorry, okay. Anyone else have any questions about that or other comments?
Yeah, I've got a question. So I'm fairly new to the cyber world, and I'm extremely interested in getting deck to play with myself.
Come see me.
So is it something that my wife, who has absolutely no technical experience whatsoever, would she be able to learn from it as well?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that would be super.
Like I said, this goes back to the incident master. If it's just like playing D&D, if you played it when you were a kid, if your incident master is new and doesn't have a whole lot of experience, it can be a little bit rough, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen and you don't make it through and it's not fun. First time you played D&D, if you were like me, the first time I played, the DM was mediocre, but you're still like, hey, that was pretty fun, let's get better. And then the 20th time you play, like, that was actually really cool. If you have an experienced incident master, maybe your first time is like my 20th time, like, that was awesome. And maybe it's like my first time where it's a bumpy road, but you're still find use in it. So.
How did the ice wall do damage?
What?
So last image you showed, it was an ice wall. How did the ice wall do damage?
You cast an ice wall across their heart. You cast an ice. I mean, there's a lot of ways. You can do it straight down the middle of the brain. I could come up with a lot of ways to cause damage with an ice wall. Yeah. Just put it underneath them and let them slide off a cliff. I can get creative here. You want to talk about ways to hurt people? I'm. Maybe I shouldn't admit that when I'm recording. Sorry. No, I don't know how to hurt people. Talk to someone else. Other comments, questions? Okay, here is, as promised, the slide deck. If you want to scan that QR code. As I mentioned, I do have a couple edits to make in there, and I will be updating those shortly. But this will get you the slides as they stand. If you have more questions, I'd love to talk to you if you have concerns. The other thing I was going to say about tabletop that I just want to mention really quick. If you want to do a full CTAP, I guarantee that you work with someone, your organization currently works with a company that will provide them for you. Tabletops are provided by almost everyone, whether it's your EDR provider, your VAR, your MDR provider, you probably already work with someone who will do it. And there is value in doing it. Engage them, talk to them, have conversation, it'll work. I feel morally obligated to say you can talk to me too. I'm scared of this one, but I'll go. I had people doing a tabletop detain me. Does that count? I'm not sure they were doing a tabletop though. I think theirs was more just straight up D&D. I'll tell you that story too if you want, but come talk to me afterwards. Anyway, thanks everybody for your time. Sorry that went down, but if you have any questions, I'd love to talk to you more. Come find me after.